You are listening to Off the Shelf, a podcast by The Conference Board.
Hello, I'm Laura Sabattini, Principal Researcher in the Human Capital Center, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to this edition of Off the Shelf, a book discussion series brought to you by The Conference Board. Today, I'm here with Colleen Ammerman and Boris Groysberg to speak about their new book, Glass HalfBroken, Shattering the Barriers That Still Hold Women Back at Work. Glass HalfBroken, Shattering the Barriers That Still Hold Women Back at Work, builds on the latest research in psychology, sociology, organizational behavior, and economics to examine women's underrepresentation in positions of power and status and among the highest earners. The gender imbalance at the top still remains, even in many women-dominated industries such as healthcare and education, where men are still more likely to be found in leadership and executive roles. So the question that many are asking is, why haven't we made more progress? And the authors discuss some of the reasons in the book. They go through different types of organizational barriers as well as opportunity for change. And they look at barriers to advancement over the course of individual careers, from entry level to senior level positions. The book presents also organizational and managerial strategy to break down these barriers. So we're going to discuss many of these topics today. Before we get to all that, let me introduce our guests really quick. We have Colleen Ammerman, is a director of the Harvard Business School Gender Initiative. She works with cutting-edge research to help drive change and address gender, race, and other forms of inequality in business and society. She oversees the initiative portfolio of activities, events, programming for practitioners, and research dissemination. Boris Groysberg is the Richard P. Chapman Professor of Business Administration at Harvard Business School, and he is a faculty affiliate at the Harvard Business School Gender Initiative. He has worked with organizations around the world and conducted research on managing human capital in small and large organizations. Colleen and Boris, welcome to Off the Shelf.
Thank you for having us.
Good to be here.
So I would like to start with a couple of general questions about how the book came about. A lot has been published on the glass ceiling since, the 80s, when the glass ceiling term was first used. What motivated you to write this book on the topic right now? Why is this still such a relevant topic?
Sure. So, while a lot has been published, a lot falls in the category of very rigorous and great research, but not very actionable or just hard for someone, in a company, a practitioner to use and apply to their own work, or in the category of, quick tips and checklists and things that are very easy to use, but actually aren't very based in research or just not evidence-based. And so we really felt like there was a need for something that would bring together the rigor and the relevance. And so we tried really hard to kind of synthesize not only work that we've done, but work across many disciplines, many colleagues at Harvard and beyond, that's really rigorous. And we know, the social sciences there, but really try to translate it in a way that, a manager, a CEO, even, somebody really in any role in a company can apply to their own thinking and kind of to being a change agent for gender equity.
Yeah, it's I would just say this, that we got to know each other, I think in about 2012, 2013. Harvard Business School was just putting together a conference called W50 to celebrate 50 years of women at Harvard Business School, our MBAs. Colleen and I and a few of our colleagues were working on actually putting this together. So, it's those type of conversations and seeing the energy and enthusiasm of our graduates who came on campus. I think we had about 800, and it was great celebration. I'm glad the school has done it. And what was interesting is we were having conversations with those senior women and men. It keep coming back the same kind of questions, right? Give us something that's practical, something actionable that we can implement in organizations. So Colleen and I, we felt like we really enjoyed working together. We had to be honest, we have very complementary skills and a very unifying agenda to say, how do we actually take all this knowledge and make it into something that we can sit in front of leaders and say, you know what, you want to build an inclusive culture? Yeah, here is where you start. Here is where you go next. Here is what to. And interesting enough, I think it took us probably longer than we thought of actually writing a book that we think is rigorous and relevant. But it was really joy. I don't know if Colleen enjoyed working with me. I certainly enjoyed working with her.
It was a lot of fun. It's been a long journey, but I learned a lot, and I think, I hope what we've put together is something that other people can learn from.
Definitely. And thank you. And I think this setup is so important because, the practical implications of the work are really important to drive change. And Boris, you've already mentioned that, you spoke with a lot of people. And I know that in the book, in addition to looking at the research has been done and trying to summarize and update what's out there, you've also conducted your own interviews and surveys. In general, what was your approach and to the questions? How did you collect the data to help you write the book?
So I think there is a number of things that really played out in this book, and from the type of methods and material that we used, I think it's probably more than I've used for any of my other books. And I'm just going to give you a few examples, and Colleen, I'm sure, will add to it. So one is we kind of approach this film and say, let's hear it from women and men, right, who are building inclusive cultures, right, or who are navigating those type of institutional barriers. So I've done a lot of interviews, right, with, it's interesting. We interviewed some young women who were actually Harvard College juniors and seniors. We interviewed some women who are just starting out in organizations, some middle managers, some senior managers, and people who actually sit on boards, right? I mean, this was across industries, across the globe. So I think that was a significant foundation for the book, is trying to understand what were the barriers, how did they navigate them. Some of them work in organizations that were disastrous. What was it look like? Some of them work in organizations that were unbelievably great. So what did those organizations kind of do? Then we spent a significant amount of time looking at existing research, just basically going field by field. I think it took us maybe 3 years, and Colleen would correct me if I'm wrong, just to kind of see what is out there. And we also have done additional research ourselves. So we published papers, we published HBR articles, and then we also have done in-depth case studies. They're part of the book, and some of them not part of the book. And finally, we have done a bunch of surveys, and I'll just mention a couple. One is that we've done a survey from a really senior woman who are going through executive program here at HBS, right? That was done, and then Colleen and her colleagues have done a massive survey of HBS graduates. I mean, I don't know how many thousands of observations that was, and I'm just like, there were other things that were done, but when I think about all these different ways. To be honest, I mean, I'm just I'm surprised we actually were able to finish the book, right? I mean, this was supposed to be done like in 2026, but the reason why I think it took us that long, and I think we were so focused on different pieces, is that the phenomenon is so complex, right? And we were hoping that the interviews, the quantitative data, the in-depth field studies on organizations and individuals, we've done both, right? Would just help us to shed a light or just move the ball forward just a little bit on this really, really complicated and absolutely important phenomenon.
Yeah, that's a great kind of overview. And I mean, all I would add, I think as Boris was just saying, we really wanted to bring to life some of, what is in the research, right? And kind of add that texture, I think, especially because we were writing this book and hoping that people in companies would read it, CEOs would read it, leaders at all different levels. It's one thing to kind of hear about this research on, say, the motherhood penalty, which is this phenomenon where, women with children are believed to be less invested in their jobs. And so therefore they're offered lower salaries, less likely to be hired. It's one thing to read about that research and the findings and think, wow, that's such a problem. You can kind of think about how this would affect women's careers. But then to also, hear in, as one example, in the words of someone we spoke to who told us, as soon as I told my company I was pregnant, I was demoted and moved from managing 30 people to 6 people. I mean, it just brings it to life to like really hear in someone's own voice what that actually means. It's not just abstract. It's realizing that this really does kind of diminish and create this drag on women's careers. And I think the other thing is, as Boris was saying, really tried to do research on everybody from young women just starting out, just about to graduate college, and kind of those first couple of years in the workforce, to middle management, all the way up to, the C-suite and women on boards, because there's lots of great stuff out there kind of on, these different stages, early career, what you need to do to kind of set yourself up for success, or women in leadership and the challenges they face, or, women in that middle part of the career when there are a lot of issues around caregiving. And that's great. Those are different kind of populations and different aspects of, the phenomenon of gender inequality. But of course, at the individual level, you experience all of them. You go from, being a senior in college ready to start in the workforce, all the way through, throughout your career. So we kind of wanted to paint this picture by looking at each of those career stages and understanding what the barriers were, and hoping that just kind of brings it to life for the reader.
So yes, what you just shared is actually related to the next question I had about the barriers that women still face that you have observed through your work. Of course, there's no time in a half an hour podcast to go over everything, but I was wondering if there's anything stood out to you that seemed new, compelling, or something that maybe hasn't changed a lot, but you found especially meaningful.
One of the things that we noticed right away in doing the research on early career women that I think was a little bit surprising was, this pattern we saw of women early in their career, especially kind of as they're about to graduate from college, really not anticipating, gender disparities or gender inequality, which makes sense, right? Because they've basically been in these educational environments that are very gender equal and gender inclusive and really been kind of empowered and encouraged. So they sort of are looking ahead and they see the, leadership gender gap and women older than them being so underrepresented in the hierarchy, upper ranks of the hierarchy. And they sort of see that as just, an artifact of past discrimination and past inequality, and sort of assume that they're not going to be dealing with that, which is, again, pretty rational when you look at their experience. But then it actually is very quick once they get into the workplace, where they start to see that maybe the playing field is not so level. So it was actually, I think, a little bit surprising to us just how quickly that happened. Often, we would go, some of the interviews, less than a year later after they'd graduated and gone on to work, that they were already kind of noticing subtly that things didn't really feel so equal. And I think, well, we knew that they were going to face these barriers. We were surprised, I think, just how quickly it popped up. And I think that's, one of the reasons it's important to talk about these early career barriers, because I think, unfortunately, a lot of younger women don't anticipate them, and therefore they sort of misinterpret the barriers as being about them, or, their kind of personal failing, rather than having a framework to understand, no, there still are some gender disparities that they're going to face.
So for me, I'll give you one positive and one negative. Let me start with one negative. I think when Colleen and I, we did a survey of those very senior women about the barriers that they faced at each of the organizational practices, right? And we looked at, how companies attract employees, how they hire, how they integrate, develop, how they assess performance, how they manage compensation, promotions, and how they do retention. The numbers struck me. I knew there were barriers. I was just really, really surprised that the numbers would be that high. And I'll give you one. The highest one for us was managing compensation and promotion. So that's 71% of women that and think about, those are the senior women, everybody who made it, right? They are ready to go on boards, right? They're running big units and so on. Basically said that they were disadvantaged a great deal, not just a little bit, a great deal. That was a really big deal. And then a very similar number was related to retention. So I was it's 2019, 2020. You look at this number and say, how much progress have we really made? So it was a little bit disappointing. On a positive side, we were fortunate to interview young men and very senior men who were determined to change those numbers, right? In our school, there is a WSA, Women's Student Association. They call them ambassadors, right? So I was just absolutely blown away, and as how many men stepped up and say, you know what, this has to change. And for me, that was a really big surprise, including our dean, who basically in one of the settings said that he considered himself a feminist. So I'll give you, that's a negative and a positive. Let's say.
No, thank you. And I'd love to discuss more about some of these barriers, but we're going to take a short break for some quick announcements first, and we'll be back in just a minute to continue our conversation about the book Glass HalfBroken, Shattering the Barriers That Still Hold Women Back at Work.
Can you, your team, or your company benefit from insights such as the ones provided in this podcast? They are immediately available when you join the Conference Board, a membership-based think tank that delivers trusted insights for what's ahead. Reaching across industries and geographies, we bring together our noted experts, senior executives from the world's largest companies, and nonpartisan practical research to help you address your most important business issues. Our membership packages are tailored to your organization's unique needs and budget. To learn more about our offerings, go to www.conferenceboard.org and click Join on the top bar to connect with one of our product specialists.
Hello, and welcome back to our discussion about the book Glass HalfBroken with the authors Colleen Ammerman and Boris Groysberg. Colleen and Boris, you just spoke about some of the reasons why you wrote the book, as well as some of the barriers that you've observed. And I do think that the book is unique in terms of breaking down the barriers across industries and as well as different types of positions of power. And you've already mentioned also across the career lifespan of people. Can you tell us a bit more what the implications are of these different variations for solutions?
I think it goes back to what Boris was saying about what we heard from senior women about the barriers they faced in all these different sort of processes, right? From the hiring process, to promotions, to kind of access to development and training and things like that. And as Boris said, was a very strong sentiment, from all of them that women continue to be disadvantaged in all these processes. And, these women are actually quite successful. So I don't think we can sort of attribute it to sour grapes, right? They actually have had pretty stellar careers. And so I think what it points to is that it really is about kind of unpacking what's happening, within all of these processes and realizing that context matters. I think one of the things that is revealing is that, when we interviewed women who actually are sitting on corporate boards, so these are women who are at like the highest echelon of power, in the business world, they themselves continue to face, different kinds of exclusion and barriers, right? And sort of even although they might be sitting in the boardroom, their voices are not heard, right, with the same sort of degree, of gravity, or sort of their contributions are not met with the same attention as their male peers, right? So you just realize how kind of deeply entrenched these disparities are when even women who've achieved, kind of that level of success and leadership are still and sometimes kind of fighting to be heard. And I think that just reminds us that context really matters. You've really got to look at what's happening in any given process, in any given room, and sort of apply what we know from research to kind of unpack that and see, what are the contributors to those barriers, which we can, talk about a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I think this is well said, and I think at that like strategic level, and I think we also provide, in our humble opinion, also very tactical advice. And I would just I just put it all under one kind of umbrella that in order to make progress on gender equity in your organizations, you just have to be systematic, right? And I think that's like a really key thing that comes out in our research, in which we have seen organizations that try to fix hiring, right? But will end up really being discriminatory on promotions and compensation. We have seen organizations that do performance management but miss something else. And one of the reasons why we focus on all those processes, and we do it one by one, like if you look at our book, we talk about attracting candidates, and we talk about here is what the challenges are. And then we say, here are the solutions. They might not be, it's certainly not a complete set of solutions, but for example, we talk about kind of all the way from looking at your language, right, to kind of going outside of your immediate networks to find people. Then we go to hiring, right, and we talk about challenges, right, similarities. So how do you kind of, what do you do with that? You have to increase the number of people and make them different who are interviewing the candidate. Then we do an integration of employees. And again, there are gender differences. So I think what we really try to push ourselves is go systematically, process by process, that affects the life of a person in organization. look at it from gender lenses, figure out what the challenges are, and then work really, really hard using best practices and research to say, look, we can give you 7 things to do, but if you do this 3, at least you'll be moving in the right direction, right? And I think we did it for organizational processes, which we think of it as a system, right? And if you do each of them right, it's like it's additive. And then and then I think a final thing I might just say is that we also highlight for organizations, if you fix the processes, but leaders who run those processes are still biased, we will accomplish nothing. And given that many organizations are still run by men have to come to the table and basically say, you know what, we can do better. I can do better, right? A fair and inclusive process run by not fair and not inclusive manager at the end is going to be not fair and not inclusive. So, and that one of the reasons why it took us longer than we anticipated is we spent the time thinking through what do we expect leaders to do, right? As it relates to their behaviors as well as it relates to organizational practices.
Yeah, and this connects well to the next question I had. You mentioned earlier about the importance of allies, and I think allies, yes, in gender, typically allies are men, but I'm thinking allies also in terms of women leaders and managers, people managers. So for change to happen, everybody has to be on board and considered an ally, if you will. Can you tell us a bit more? You go in your book, you go into that, and again, you've already mentioned the importance of men allies. What are some of the selling points, if you will, for men to become allies to gender initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really important, component of the sort of solution map, you might say, right? The role of men, and it's one that, Boris and I both care a lot about and spend a lot of time thinking about. And I think it, connects to what Boris was just saying about we're trying to kind of equip readers, whatever their sphere of influence, right? Whether they are a CEO who actually can sort of say, I'm going to overhaul, how we think about recruiting people, developing them, retaining them, right? And apply this research to like make sure our processes and our actual systems, sort of are de-biased and the barriers have been eliminated. Or somebody who's just, kind of a manager of a small team, right? There's that sphere of influence still really mattered. And then, again, for men in general, because they're more likely to be in these leadership positions, and then also just kind of in their own lives, as, citizens and family members, right, have a really important sphere of influence, right? So we wanted to equip anyone, whatever that sphere is, with kind of this idea of like, this is a competency for me, as a leader, as, a colleague. And I think for men, we talk about a lot of different dimensions in the book. Again, certainly if you're in, a managerial position, really both applying kind of these frameworks around systems and then also applying kind of these principles about being an inclusive leader, right? Which requires some kind of critical self-reflection and stepping back and sort of thinking about what biases you might hold, conscious or unconscious, and being willing to kind of, question your initial thinking or your kind of, instinct about who I'm going to maybe give this opportunity for, right? I mean, that actually, requires some sort of self-reflection and really, thinking about your actions maybe in a way that does not come naturally, or you weren't taught maybe, in business school, or, that's something that you're kind of a skill that you're developing, but it really is a skill, it's a muscle that anyone can learn. And I think, of course, for men, just more broadly, as Boris was saying before, we talked to some really incredible kind of young men who are out there, both in their companies, also, in business school and just in their lives, doing the work of kind of in a social setting, right? Speaking up about, a biased comment somebody makes, right? About, women in their workplace, which doesn't even have to be that egregious, but sometimes these kind of subtle comments, just contribute to these notions about, women being less suited for leadership, et cetera. And so I think we know from other research that it's actually very powerful when men, speak up. It actually, their words sometimes carry more weight because they're not perceived as being self-interested when it comes to gender equality, right? It's sort of perceived as selfless. So in a way, they have, kind of this really important tool at their disposal to say, as a man, I can kind of advocate and speak up, and that's going to sort of really, be received with gravity and sort of be listened to. And I think that's just such a huge opportunity for men. And, in general, right? Whether they're a CEO or a manager or just, a colleague, it's a huge opportunity for them to make a difference.
I think just building up on what Colleen said, I think those great men were able to push us to make that particular chapter from man should just, should help woman and, XYZ to actually be very, very tactical. And because men would ask us, like, what exactly do we need to do? And I think it made us a little bit more tactical, which I think is a positive all the way from kind of, like, here is the things you can do, right? Nurture your relationship with female colleagues, right? Make sure you provide, in addition to coaching and you provide sponsorship. I think what Colleen mentioned, speak up when you hear problematic comments, when you see the process that's being broken, right? Work on that process. If you're a leader, go bigger, right? I mean, see if you can actually fix more than that. The example that a lot of people connect to us in our book was a number of men try to, and I'll use it in quotation marks, protect women, right? From, they'll say, okay, Colleen is not going to go on international assignment. She has 2 kids or this and that. And we're just like, stop protecting women, right? Let them make their own choices and reject the notion that women don't want to be on the leadership track, which still some people do. And I also kind of one that I also kind of appreciated is when we advise them to take full amount of paternity leave, right? So it doesn't become kind of only one-sided in the organization. So I look at it, we try to be practical based on some of the men that we studied, including Colleen ended up interviewing a gentleman in the United Kingdom who I still think is one of the most interesting examples of our story. And single-handedly, he was able to change BBC. Am I correct?
Yeah, he started the 50-50 project at BBC.
And it just takes one person. Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm. No, that's great. And so as I know we're almost at time. So to wrap up, I was actually wanted to bring up, I know that your book and your research happened before 2020. And so I wanted to make it a connection to what you are, wrote about and recommended to the very current and real challenge of many women leaving the workforce as a result of the pandemic or work-life challenges, as well as how women are being impacted by layoffs based on the kind of positions or roles they're in. And so, again, we probably don't have time to cover that extensively, but I was wondering how your book can inform even this relative, new challenge, though it's built on previous ones, of course.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's obviously one we've been thinking about a lot and talking about a lot. And we've been, writing about recently, right? Sort of in this current reality, what does everything that we already know about gender inequality tell us about how to address the inequalities that are sort of intensifying or more visible? And then how do we address them as we try to get back to, some new normal, whatever that may be. So it's definitely something that we've been thinking about a lot. And there's, again, this is a complex phenomenon. There's a lot of different things going on, right? There's, of course, just the lack of childcare infrastructure, particularly in the U.S., right? Which means that women who do shoulder this disproportionate caregiving burden, really don't have a support system. I mean, that's kind of a macro level, like public policy infrastructure issue. But in the workplace, I think one thing we've been talking about recently is that, I think we need to acknowledge that all of these, including the childcare issue, but others as well, all of these issues that have come to the fore with the pandemic and with moving to remote work and kind of the challenges that bring, none of them are really new. So for instance, there's, I just saw a recent report from Project Include out in Silicon Valley that said tech workers are reporting more gender and also race and other race-based and other forms of harassment in their remote workplace, in the virtual workplace, and you can think about, as great as remote work is, if you're not thoughtful about it, it can actually contribute, to subtle discrimination. Being left out of meetings can be, happen perhaps more often or more easily, right? And so people's voices aren't included. Like there's all sorts of things that we're hearing about, all sorts of studies. We're all seeing the data. I think the bottom line with that is that we just have to recognize that all of this is sort of a symptom of this underlying disease that we were already dealing with, pre-COVID, right? Which is the way that our workplaces still are very unequal, still really not healthy in a lot of ways for anybody. I mean, one of the things that you learn if you kind of start digging into this, research is that, workplaces that tend to be better for women tend to be better for everyone, because they're workplaces that are built on more transparency, have better processes, again, are more inclusive in all these dimensions. They're just healthier workplaces in general. And so many of our workplaces before COVID and during, just are not very healthy, right? There's all kinds of dynamics that don't contribute to making people feel engaged, that certainly don't contribute to sort of equality of opportunity and equality of development. And so we've really got to think about kind of tackling these, underlying, again, this underlying disease. Otherwise, we're just going to kind of end up, post-COVID going back to some semblance of normal where maybe some of these inequities are less visible, but they're still very much there. Women are still going to be much more stressed and overburdened and undervalued. And so it's an opportunity, I think, for us to really kind of dig in at the root of those problems and inequalities and actually, we have the potential to kind of come back from this very difficult year stronger in terms of kind of the health of our organizations and certainly their level of equity and inclusion.
I will just add three things to Colleen's really great comment around the pandemic. One is looking at all this data that's coming out 2020, 2021, I feel like it threw us back 10, 15 years. I am disappointed. I'm angry. I mean, there's a lot of bad emotions. I feel like we lost a lot of time in that 1 year. So that's one. And by the way, and many of those things were already in existence, right? The pandemic just made it just a lot more visible and faster and so on. So the second one I would just say is, and we wrote a piece early on in the pandemic, one of the early pieces, when we said, what, we are hearing from all those women that we know that pandemic has created this. They finally, through pandemic, feel about the organization one of two ways. They either love it or they hate it. There was no middle. So for us, that was astonishing, right? Because we were just like, wow, there was no middle. So the woman, the senior woman were telling us, I would never leave this organization, right? This is my home. I now see how special it is. Or they will be, when the labor market recovers, I would be the first one to go. And there was nothing in between, right? So that was interesting. I've never seen that before. And then we did another piece later on to basically say, if that's the case, right? And you are an organization that wants gender, right? That wants diversity, right? That wants gender. This is like your opportunity to bring all those talented women in, right? And create a comparative advantage. So we did another piece just walking through what other organizations have done to create an environment, right? Where everybody else is not doing a good job to say, you know what? If you want to be in banking, right? Why would you want to go for anybody else? Work for us. Just look how great we are. I think there will be a few organizations who want to evolve and actually make their cultures, right, more inclusive for all different type of people, right? And therefore will create a source of really sustainable competitive advantage during these uneasy times.
So this is great. Colleen and Boris, thank you so much for speaking with us today. And thanks to our listeners for tuning into the conversation. You can purchase Glass HalfBroken, Shattering the Barriers that Still Hold Women Back at Work on the Harvard Business Review site or wherever you shop for books. For more information about Harvard Business School Gender Initiative, please go to hbs.edu/gender. Again, it's hbs.edu/gender. And if you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to our off-the-shelf book discussion series or to explore the entire catalog of podcast programming from the Conference Board. You can find it on our website at conferenceboard.org/podcast. This is Laura Sabatini from the Conference Board, and thank you for joining us today.
This has been Off the Shelf, a podcast by the Conference Board.